Bem-vindos. Este é um ciclo de conferências que tem acontecido desde novembro do ano passado, no âmbito de um projeto mais vasto que se chama Lugar, Comum. Surgiu esta iniciativa do município de desenvolvermos algumas conversas, uma por mês, sobre temas que dizem respeito à cidade, ao futuro das cidades, nos seus mais diversos aspectos. Hoje temos o especialista em criatividade, Fleming, e também em cidades criativas, que será daqui a pouco apresentado pelo José Luís Ferreira, e temos também do lado da Câmara Municipal António Ramalho, do Departamento de Planeamento e Gestão Urbana. Infelizmente o vereador Adriano de Sousa teve um contratempo urgente e não está cá hoje, em direto, porque estará depois em diferido. E queria também dar as boas-vindas à Ana Tércia, que está agora a entrar, à Susana, ao João Catalão, enfim, pouco a pouco vamos chegando, ainda não estão todos os que se inscreveram. Maneira que eu vou eventualmente perguntar ao António Ramalho se quer fazer algum comentário sobre este ciclo que nos leva a refletir sobre o futuro das cidades, o futuro próximo e o futuro mais distante.
Gostaria, até por economia de tempo, de cumprimentar todos os presentes nesta sessão, dizer que da minha parte é uma enorme satisfação representar o município de Vila Real nesta conversa, desejar uma boa conversa, uma boa discussão e remeto depois os meus contributos para a parte da discussão. Muito obrigado.
Muito bem, eu agora já estamos quase, eu penso que daqui a 1 minuto podíamos apresentar o nosso orador, Fleming, e entretanto explicar um pouco como é que nós fazemos estes procedimentos.
Ora, vamos a isso então. A sessão será em inglês, o Tom vai falar-nos e fazer-nos a sua apresentação, que terá uma duração aproximada de 30 minutos, a que seguirá depois uma fase de debate. Como tem sido o hábito nestas sessões, eu peço-vos que durante a apresentação do Tom mantenham os microfones e as câmaras desligadas, porque assim economizamos largura de banda e temos melhor qualidade e concentramos-nos na apresentação do Tom Fleming. Depois, para podermos gerir também de uma maneira mais acertada a fase de perguntas e respostas, pedimos que vão colocando as vossas questões ao longo da apresentação através do chat, do bate-papo que está na parte de baixo do vosso ecrã. As questões podem ser colocadas em português ou já em inglês no final da apresentação. Eu e a Teresa Albuquerque, então, colocaremos essas questões ao Tom Fleming. Temos mais algumas pessoas a entrar. De qualquer modo é isso, eu vou provavelmente começando com a apresentação do Tom Fleming, do nosso convidado desta noite. Tom Fleming é uma autoridade global em economia criativa, em políticas para as artes e para a cultura, com escritórios em Londres e, curiosamente, no Porto, e com associados espalhados um pouco por todo o mundo. O Tom Fleming desenvolve, através da TFCC, a Tom Fleming Creative Consulting, processos de conhecimento e ferramentas que colocam a criatividade no centro da discussão. Trabalhou em diversas cidades em Portugal desde 2007, incluindo um trabalho bastante aprofundado e significativo com Guimarães 2012, Capital Europeia da Cultura, e em projetos em cidades como Braga, Aveiro, Évora, Óbidos, Viana do Castelo, Porto e Lisboa. No final de 2020 vai lançar em Portugal um novo projeto de consultoria em economia criativa, a TFCC Europa. Talvez ele daqui a pouco depois nos explique porquê. Tom, welcome to this session. It's all yours.
Welcome, Tom, and bye-bye. I'm going to disappear from the image and see you later.
Okay, well, thank you very much, obrigado, for the introduction. And I wish two things. One is that I was in Portugal and we were all meeting face-to-face in a real world room. And the other thing is that I wish I could speak better Portuguese so that I wouldn't have to talk to you in English for the next few minutes. It's a big regret of mine. I've been working in Portugal since 2007 and everybody speaks to me in English, and it's not an excuse but it's been very difficult for me to describe my thoughts articulately in Portuguese. So one day, I promise I will do a full presentation in Portuguese, but today is not the day for that, unfortunately. I'm going to put my screen on now so that you can see the slides that I've prepared for you today. And I want to just to talk through some what I think are key strategic questions for cities today, as we are still in the crisis, but as we hopefully emerge from this incredible health and economic and social crisis. And my main point, and the real urgency here, is that we need to absolutely explore our creative potential and embrace creativity now as a way of redeveloping our cities and creating almost a new social contract with the citizens of cities. This is not just about the creative industries or the economy. This is absolutely about a holistic approach to placemaking. It's about reimagining cities through the application of creative thought, creative practice, crossing boundaries to create and affect change. And I think that smaller cities are in a brilliant position relatively to explore the opportunities that creativity can bring. So I'm just going to talk you through some core themes, some ideas, and then we can have a good conversation about this after I've talked for a few minutes, if that is okay with you. So of course, everything is different today. This is an art gallery in the city of Sheffield in Northern England, and I'm the chair of this art gallery, which is called Site. And we went through a process of developing a new building over the last few years. A contemporary visual art space, which is an anchor and a catalyst for the cultural and creative life of the city, particularly for the independent contemporary art scene. And we commissioned an artist called Tim Enschel, who developed this sign at the top, everything is different today. And this was when we opened the building. And the building has only reopened last week after 6 months being closed. And the interpretation of everything being very different today is really, really different to what it was when we opened the building again. And this is where we are as a society in Portugal and across the world. We're not going back. The world as we knew doesn't exist anymore. Lockdown has changed who we are, how we identify with ourselves, what we value, and what we want to do in the future. And we all know this, and this is a crisis of the soul as much as it is a crisis of health and of the economy. And in that context, we can look at COVID in two ways in terms of what it's doing to our society and what it means for city making. First of all, of course, it's a huge disruptor. It's changed the way we live, the way we work, how we identify, and how we operate. And we don't know, nobody knows how we will re-emerge from this crisis. But it's also been an accelerator of things that were already happening, that were already in play. It's brought to the fore a whole range of changes, not least technological change, not least the way we work, the home working, balancing that with family life, with well-being. This is something that was already hugely proliferating and growing, and it's just accelerated that to a new normal for many people. For the arts and the cultural sector, we've seen an acceleration of digitalization. This again is the organization that I'm the chair of, Site Gallery. We moved everything online. We generated new channels, always commissioning new content, working with our audiences in different ways through digital platforms, trying to still be a hub, a connector, but without the luxury of a building. And this is what was happening already for many cultural organizations, many artists, many acts across different art forms, but it's obviously become the new normal. And creating that hybrid new world where digital and physical interface in productive and exciting ways is the new challenge for the cultural and creative sector. So COVID has accelerated those kinds of trends. It's also, as a disruptor and an accelerator, brought into focus a question around the role of cities, and particularly of larger cities. For many people, the majority of people in the global north, living in large megacities, that there is a question as to the extent to which they are the desirable scale and form for living and working in the future. Can New York, can London, can Paris, can larger cities, Lisbon even, future-proof themselves, where people are making very serious considerations about where they want to live, about well-being, about quality of air, around mobility, and around access to the kinds of things that they are valuing and increasingly valuing through the crisis. Is the pandemic killing the attraction of megacities? And if it is, what does that mean for other cities? And this is an example of where the crisis has been an accelerator again, in that we were already seeing the declining cost of distance, digitalization, the rise of home working, the balance between urban and rural in terms of what people value. We were seeing suburbanization, but also in some contexts, the renaissance of smaller towns and cities and rural countryside areas. And this is happening more now than ever before. So that brings into focus a question as to whether we may see the renaissance of the smaller city, or certainly smaller cities that are committed to taking risks and embracing with their creative asset base. This is, again, not something new. Monocle magazine, I'm sure most of you will be aware of, has been celebrating the value of the best smaller cities for some time now. They even have an annual smaller cities index, which tries to rank small and medium-sized cities across the world. And interestingly, in that category of small, they include cities like Porto. So obviously, the size of a city, whether you see yourself as small or big, is context specific. And I wouldn't see Porto as a smaller city in the Portuguese context, of course. It's a major city. So this brings into onto the table a question around whether smaller cities can kickstart innovation in terms of planning, in terms of economic and social development, and how culture and creativity can be at the heart of that process going forward. So there's an opportunity here amongst the doom and the gloom, in the middle of the crisis still. There's an opportunity, indeed a necessity, to rethink the value proposition of smaller cities. And I would advocate that the way to do that is to absolutely embrace creativity and the role of creative practitioners, artists, designers, people able to cross boundaries, be interdisciplinary, and to take risks. And the starting point for that is about thinking about the existing profile and dynamics of the city, the existing assets of the city. The mayor of Milan, which obviously, where Milan was in the eye of the storm of the COVID pandemic back in February, has talked about the need to rethink the rhythms of the city, trying to understand how people are living and working now as they come up for air from the lockdown reality. And in that context, we're seeing much more talk around how we improve the livability of the city. And again, here, COVID is both a disruptor and an accelerator, because we were already talking about things like the 15-minute city, how you parcel together amenities, including access to culture and green space at a neighborhood level within larger cities, but also how smaller cities can themselves define themselves as the smart 15-minute city, where you can have all of the things that realistically you need for fulfilling life and for fulfilling professional development within 15 minutes of your home. And this has come into increasing attention as a consequence of the crisis. And as the anthropologist and historian Lilia Schwartz articulates, is that we were fanatics of technological change and technological-led transformation for much of the 20th century. But what we're seeing now is not a return to the analog world, or it's not a backward step in terms of our embrace of technology. We know that because I'm talking to you now through Zoom, for example. But what we're seeing now is a rebalancing, where people are wanting the technological innovation, but they also want to have the human scale access to things that they perhaps have felt have been deprived of them through the speed of technological change. And that means high quality places with intimacy, openness, generosity, imagination, and creativity, where creativity can help to build a better post-COVID city. And creativity is the only chance to build a better post-COVID city, because we can't use the old tools, we can't fall back to where we were. We've got to future-proof the cities, we've got to cross boundaries and how we reframe the idea of the city in itself. And this is difficult. If you just look at a municipality, the way that the municipalities operate, or a university, you have your departments, you have your structures, your systems, your ways of working. They were proven technologies in a different age. But we need to make sure that for the future, they are not redundant, or they are not the sources of illiteracy in terms of planning. We need to unlearn and relearn. We need to reframe and reimagine. And that is from everything to government structures in a municipality, how we engage with our citizens, to how we even rethink what the role of certain parts of a city are, the role of a street, the role of a park, the role of a library, the role of a cultural institution. And these are some big picture questions in that context. Why are we going small when historically everybody was going big? Because we're responding to the diseconomy of scale. We need the physical in digital times. We need to connect our memories to inspire new generations. We need to talk to each other more, connect, share. And we need to have that balance between being online and offline. And we need to relocate notions of the center of activity, notions of the hub, and remoter places, smaller places, can be the center of the conversation if they get it right. And again, this is not new. Some of you, I'm sure, will have been familiar with the City Slow movement and the notion of slow cities, and everything from urban gardening to authenticity to provenance in where you buy your food. This was already happening, but it's happening more now. It's going to happen even more in the future. And this is around speeding up slowness in a way. It's around smaller cities embracing the attributes they've got to get that balance right. But it's not a cozy backward step. City making has to be brave, has to be radical. It has to fail in some instances in order to define the solutions that will work long term. And to articulate that, I want to go back to the experience that I had in Guimarães back in 2012, where I was programming the Criative Cidade element of the European Capital of Culture. Because there we were tasked with applying creative practice to reimagine the possibility of the smaller city. The idea of Guimarães being a test bed for creative city making. And we did that through a whole range of interventions, embracing talent through new commissions, a pop-up cultural program, utilizing the city's resources like the market, old retail spaces, public squares, to ask questions about identity, public space, to furnish the city with new ideas around planning, around cohesion, and looking particularly at social innovation. But the challenge in all of this was around finding that sweet spot between the bits of the city that historically were disconnected from one another. The challenge is often in the arts and the creative industries that they become segmented away from the mainstream around city planning, city thinking, or they're disconnected from other sectors, whether it be tourism or technology or health or science, whatever the sectors may be. We were trying to look for new tools, new spaces, third spaces where interactions can take place, which will help to generate a new narrative for the city. And the challenge, I think, though, for Guimarães was that it was almost a little bit too soon, in that the process of rethinking the role of smaller cities was in its infancy, and that cities, bigger cities such as Porto, were still very much in the ascendancy, were really on trend, really growing in their attractiveness. And it's only more recently, I think, that we're seeing cities like Guimarães actually become desired objects in terms of places to live and work. Their moment has come. And it's also because it's taken that long for those spaces, those interaction platforms to mature, where new businesses can develop and grow, where the buzz becomes a normal reality. And we're doing something, we're exploring something on a similar trajectory at the moment, but in a different programmatic context with the city of Aveiro, where they are looking at how they can inject creativity to the heart of their wider economic development strategy, which focuses on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The A being arts, and they're at the beginning of this process. But the whole idea is to interact and connect, putting culture as a development tool at the heart of the city, which focuses in a holistic way on the challenges that the city and many other cities face around talent attraction and retention, environmental sustainability, cohesion, and how to generate content for the growing technology sector in that city. And the bigger agenda here is for the city to become a testbed or a lab. And the quality of scale here, being a smaller city, means you can test stuff, explore stuff, see the results of your interventions more easily, more readily than you can in a larger city. So notionally, smaller cities can be more agile. They can demonstrate better than bigger cities. They can lead the charge for reimagining the city of the future. But it's really difficult. And there are real disconnects in any city, including Aveiro, between, for example, the traditional cultural sector and the emergent tech sector, between the university and the policymakers in City Hall, between different communities, existing historically embedded communities and newer, more diverse and younger communities. These challenges, these barriers need to be overcome. Another example is in another smaller city, in Exeter, in southwest England. We have just finished their cultural strategy, a process of participatory engagement with the cultural sector of the city, but more broadly with the key parts of the economy and the society of the city. It's a city of 100,000 people with a big university, strong heritage sector, and a really interesting emergent set of technology-intensive, creative and design businesses, which have a very strong focus on environment and sustainability. And the cultural strategy that we developed sought, as in Aveiro, as in Guimarães, to make the connections between different sectors, different parts of the fabric of the city, to make those connections between heritage and technology, for example. And the cultural strategy embodies those connections. It's a strategy for culture at the heart of city making. It's not a strategy just to explore how you support the cultural sector to develop and grow. For example, how do you support artists? How do you develop sustainable business models for cultural organizations? How do you develop new audiences? It does those things, but it actually hangs together thematically in relation to the big strategic agendas that that city is facing. So the number one priority is for culture to be an enabler for developing environmental sustainability in the city, building and utilizing the skills and the ideas of artists and cultural organizations to rethink agendas around mobility, around recycling, around approaches to collaboration in the innovation landscape to look at new products and services. So it's a holistic approach to environmental sustainability through culture and the arts, as it is through the second theme, which is around culture and well-being. We are modeling, for example, a cultural prescribing program where people, if they go to their doctor or connect into the mainstream health service, are also given access to cultural activities as part of the care program or the well-being program alongside medical assistance, if this is relevant to their, obviously to their particular health needs. We're building stronger partnership between the cultural sector and key platforms in the city, like the library, the health service, the sports and well-being parts of the local government and the partners that go with that. We're looking at heritage as a contemporary asset, not just something to be protected, not just something to go back in time for, but also something that pivots you to the future through digitalization, through the active reimagining of heritage assets for contemporary cultural use, such as for artist studios, design workshops. We're looking at building heritage in terms of the digital capacity that the heritage sector has, so another holistic agenda. And at the heart of all this, it's about building the capacity of the creative sector to make new work, to test new work, to explore, to experiment, to collaborate. And this is key. You can't do this without the artists. So building capacity, professionalizing the sector, embracing them and investing in them long term, giving them the space, affordable space to work in, giving them the connections, and championing them as innovative and excellent attributes and resources for the city overall, and enabling them to work with the diverse communities of the city and with education partners, so that people in schools, people in universities, people in care setting have access to the cultural capital of the city, and that they have access to each other through the facilitating role that cultural organisations can have. And underpinning all of this, and it's a question for any city, is what if by working together we push boundaries? What if by working together we generated a new narrative for the city, a new understanding of the cultural resources of the city? And I see a critical value proposition here is that there are no sort of big levers anymore we can pull to reset the city. There are very few cities that have an industrial base where certain larger firms dominate. We're moving much more towards a micro business, even a freelance economy. We're moving much more to a convergent economy where different sectors come together in new and often very exciting ways. And that means for policy, there aren't clear building blocks. The most obvious way to support city making going forward is to have an approach that seeds lots of ideas and provides the enabling conditions for creative people then to build from those ideas and then to flourish and grow the city of the future. And this is something that's being increasingly embraced at a policy level. So in England, for example, the Arts Council's new strategy is about let's create. It's about focusing absolutely on finding ways to give people the space, the platform, the resources to explore their creative imagination and make new work and apply it in a strategic context which enhances well-being, health, environmental sustainability and economic development. And this is the creative city that in my work internationally I strive for. This is about putting the creatives, and the creatives are not just the artists, they're people who are able to think differently, to be collaborative, to problem solve and to take risks. It's about putting those creative people at the heart of the conversation and treating them with the respect that they deserve, because they will come up with the ideas that drive innovation in the future. So where in your city do those creative people have the space to explore their imagination? Where is the test bed, the lab, the interconnected platform that enables them to work with the technologists, the health professionals, the educators in the university? Where do people have an opportunity to explore, for example, new materials, to connect with people who have different disciplinary backgrounds, to, in doing so, create new content, new materials, new businesses, new products, new stories? And I love this quote from the Portuguese crafts practitioner, Patricia Domingues, who talks about the need for the tangible and the real in the digital context. She makes amazing work made from industrial materials, and she reframes them as contemporary, high value, desirable objects. And she does that by crossing boundaries and working in ways that historically she would have been squeezed to the margins. She wouldn't have got access to the people of that material science expertise to even be able to do the work that she does. And it's about access that's so important, I think, for cities going forward. And even seeing the city itself, its resources, its built environment and its memories as a creative material to work with. So where in your city are the spaces for creation? Where in your city are the hubs that connect people physically and digitally to explore what they might be able to do together? This is Dynamo in Viana do Castelo in northwest Portugal, which is just a small interactive creative workspace. This is the Pervasive Media Studio in Bristol in southwest England, which brings together scientists, technologists, artists with a commissioning program that seeks ways to commission across the boundaries to get people to test bed and prototype new products and services through the proximity that that lab brings. Post-COVID, hopefully, we'll all be able to really bring that physical nature back in, but the Pervasive Media Studio has been operating pretty well, even at a distance, even digitally, in the last few months. And as Inês Santos Silva, who's the co-founder of Portuguese Women in Tech, says, we need to use these times of crisis as a community and rally behind the big and audacious vision. She says that if we know anything about Portugal, is that we're great at finding creative and unexpected solutions for tough problems. And we can only find those solutions if we put those people who are knocking at the door, trying to break in with those ideas, who perhaps felt undervalued, disconnected, they need to be right at the front of the solution task force for your city going forward. And who can bring them together? Well, the cultural system, the cultural sector can operate as hubs and as brokers, as anchors and as catalysts for the city. These are just a few mini cultural organisations, including the Centre for Art and Architecture Affairs in the bottom left corner, which is an NGO really, set up by the independent cultural sector in Guimarães as part of the whole process of European Capital of Culture. It has a convening force, bringing together talent and giving them a safe space to explore ideas and a safe space to generate new cultural trajectories for the city. So are the cultural organisations, the museums, the galleries, the hubs, are they given a privileged role in your cities as those enablers for the new types of conversation to happen, as game changers for city identity, and as hubs for production of new cultural value, whether that be stories, products, services, whatever it may be. Museums and galleries are becoming really, really critical in terms of this whole making revolution that we're seeing across cities internationally now, which converge the digital and the physical to become the workshops for the future city. And going back to Site Gallery, that's what we've been doing there in Sheffield. With a program, City of Space, around around utilising digital in street signage and around audience engagement, particularly for young people. And this has become an urban pathfinder, which explores everything from new types of street furniture to how we engage with young people. This is the Society of Explorers, the Site Gallery. This is the new generation of people who will feel a sense of ownership for the gallery and the city because they program their own work. They have their own content, which comes through the heart of the gallery now, and they're vital generators of new thinking so that we can stay relevant as a cultural institution. And this is what we were doing back in Guimarães in 2012, utilising old redundant public space and turning it into places for creative practice and creative presentation, building the buzz of the city by looking at a city's challenges and twisting them into opportunities, solutions for reanimating the city. In Bristol, where we developed the cultural strategy, which focused very much on intercultural inclusion and social cohesion, we were amazed that a quote from our strategy became graffiti art on a bridge in this city. And this quote, I think, again, puts to the fore the importance of creative people in the heart of the conversation. A city strategy needs to champion the messy, marginal, radical, and avant-garde. This is not just about propping up the old models. This is about saying yes to the new models. And that's a city that has pioneered approaches to play, for example, as a way of creatively reimagining the city. How do we move around the city? How can play help us to think about mobility, urban design, structures and strata in the city. And this is where, again, the digital and the physical come together to create this hybrid world where cities can become the platform for new experiences. And these are some other examples, like the Algae Garden in Quebec, or Mischievous Footprints by PCT, where there's a digital echo that follows you around, or the city becomes more interactive as you, and it changes through the behavior of the citizens, and the citizens feel a sense of agency in that city itself, like Make Your Rhythm, which is an interactive musical playground bus stop model. So what is a bus stop? Why does it need to be just a shelter? Can't it also be something that we can interact with and play with and feel good about in terms of how we live and work in our city? So where do we go from here? How do we go to develop the next level of networking? How do we ensure that we don't just get lost in the vast array of possibilities, but we actually be practical and strategic going forward? We need to try things out. We need to develop and explore new models. We need to get that balance between physical and digital right. This is Mansions of the Future in a small city called Lincoln in the east of England. It's a 3-year pilot project, which is trying to connect the otherwise unconnected parts of the city, different communities, different sectors, through artistic commissioning, through celebrating young people. It's through the arts that the city is being reframed. It's through the arts that sectors are coming together that didn't used to talk to each other. And it's through the arts that we're influencing approaches to planning in terms of physical planning, but also in terms of what the economy might look like in the future. So the moment is now. Next year, the UN has declared as the International Year of Creative Economy for Sustainable Development. We need to think about the wider impact of the creative economy on sustainable and inclusive city making. And we in turn need to think about how would you nurture a creative city long-term, a sustainable creative city long-term. So just to close, I want to just draw your attention to a city called Oulu in northwest Finland, which is a candidate city to be European Capital of Culture for 2026. And their overarching proposition is for affecting what they call culture climate change. There is a systemic climate challenge there with as the weather gets warmer in the north of Finland, as the Barents Sea becomes more navigable, as deforestation becomes an issue, as air quality is an issue. There's a whole range of environmental challenges there. And I see culture as a way of exploring how to tackle some of those environmental challenges, and how to bring together those people working in environmental science and technology in the arts to think about what is possible in that city. And crucially, the arts has a power to bring people together in ways where they can explore what they have in common, but also creatively explore the differences that they have. So this is an interdisciplinary program of creative reimagination for Oulu, and everything that they do seems to have that creative distinctiveness running through it. So this is something called Polar Bear Pitching, where every year in February, they have a big creative and digital startup event or festival, which brings together people from across the Nordic and Scandinavian region and beyond to pitch ideas to investors for their creative startup. But the difference here is that they have to pitch the idea while standing in the lake in the heart of the city, or the harbour area of the city, which is absolutely free in freezing cold conditions. And they can pitch for as long as they can bear the extremely cold weather. And this has become really well known internationally now. It's become known as a kind of quirky, distinctive, but also some great business ideas get proposed there. And it's that application of creativity, using the resources of the city, that has enabled them in this small city on the edge of Finland to play a central role, to become more of a hub for creative and digital startups. And it's bringing in investment, and it's a real asset for the city in terms of its position and its confidence. So for smaller cities in Portugal and elsewhere, it's about being brave, and it's about having substance, and it's about being committed. So could, for example, Villarreal develop a creative manifesto, a 7 or 10 point plan that works out what its creative assets are, that explores what is working, what is challenging, and connects creativity in the arts to those system-wide challenges around cohesion, talent attraction and retention, environmental sustainability, and critically post-COVID, the health and well-being agenda, where just participation in arts and culture can be so important for the pastoral care of our society in the future. Or can Villarreal or other cities get together in Portugal? We talked about this back in 2012. Is there a network where smaller cities can connect and build their profile, but also argue for investment, argue to be supported as hubs and catalysts for the creative economy of Portugal? So it's not just about Lisbon or Porto, it's about smaller cities driving change across the country. That's the challenge I feel for Portuguese smaller cities now, is to move quickly and embrace creativity. Don't be a city that waited for somewhere else to take the lead when you would have been better placed to take the lead yourselves. So thank you. That's my little talk. Everything is different today. So I'm looking forward to discussing this with you.
Wow, thank you very much, Tom, for a very inspiring talk. So full of ideas. I don't know, Antonio, if you want to start the conversation. I know we have some questions already from the public. José Luís, perhaps will...
Yes, we have one first question, but maybe you want to comment Tom's presentation first, which was really inspiring, António. Tem que ligar o microfone, não estamos a ouvir.
Okay. You are listening me now? Okay.
Sim, sim, sim.
I would like to share three brief reflections and discuss three very concrete questions. First of all, I think the first big question of creative cities is who is responsible for creating and recreating cities. On this matter, I believe that this responsibility belongs to all of us, experts, not experts, the ordinary citizens. This, if we have a collective and a community sustainable perspective, of course. So, the first big question is that we are all urban planners. Now we are all urban planners in physical forms of city or and of social forms. So I ask, the urbanism or urban planification as a relatively new social science is being reconfigured. And the second question, the creative city, I think, links the economy, culture and local identity. The more economic investment in culture and local institutional thickness is greater the development. So I ask, creative cities are limited to their economic capacity? The last question, I think there is a significant gap between planning and urban management. Planning while defining a strategy and program to territory, the urban management while the daily act of management of city. On the other hand, planning has been more participatory, the urban management is mandatory. So I ask finally, how can we transform the practice of urban management more participatory? There are examples of more participatory management strategies. This is my contribute for now. Thank you.
Wow.
Yes. So.
Obrigado. Okay, where to start? I want to start just by agreeing with you absolutely that who is responsible? We all are, and it's citizen-led. And planners and municipalities, they are servants of the citizens, and their role should be to enable the citizens to realize their potential. in terms of that,
we are losing you, Tom. Maybe we wait a little bit. Tom? Ground control to Major Tom.
Gap between planning, urban planning and urban management. I think that relates to the first point around it. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I guess so. Now we can.
Hello? Hello?
Well, I can hear
Yes.
you now. Yes.
Very good.
Yes, please proceed.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, this shows, you see, in the digital connectivities, even in London, is much worse than in lots of other places I've noticed during this lockdown. Yeah, I think that there is this disconnect between urban planning and urban management. And I think that the disconnect happens because a lot of the participatory energy happens in the planning phase, but not in the management phase. And it often creates the notion of an agreement that something is settled, whereas actually cities are always in a process. So there has to be more flexibility in terms of urban management and almost a kind of R&D element to urban management that tests new things as the city changes. And actually we're seeing this, there's an incredible amount of innovation that is coming through this horrible COVID era because we have had no choice. So for example, the integration of pedestrian and cars, in terms of more hybrid streets, that's where urban management has had to be much more flexible and participatory because something had to be done very quickly. Or creating these, meanwhile cycle lanes as well, not waiting for them to be structured and expensively prepared, that actually you can reorientate the city by providing those kinds of amenities in a very flexible way. We're seeing now a lot of areas around schools where the streets around schools are being closed to traffic at certain times of the day. So they become, for 2 hours a day, almost like good for health and well-being. It encourages walking and cycling to school. It's good for social distancing during COVID. And I think it's good for creating softer, safer cities more generally, more amenable cities. So these are examples of flexible and open approaches to urban management that have managed to maneuver away from the rigid approaches to urban planning because the times have required it. But if we took that spirit more broadly, looking at how do we manage our parks, or how do we create more integrated or diverse urban landscapes in city centres which are losing their shops, this is where we can come into the realm of real innovation. There was a report issued just today by the Arts Council in England on the value of cultural organisations in city centre environments, in a context of retail going down, in a context of antisocial behaviour, these kinds of things. And it really showed lots of examples of how cultural practice, having museums and galleries, yes, but also having things outside, having things that supported artists to develop their work in the public realm. These are really key to making city centres more attractive. And they should be part of a post-COVID approach to planning, but also to the way you manage public space. Yeah, so I think those two things come together a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. I don't know. We have a couple of questions over to Cristóvão. Isn't that it, José Luís?
Yes, that's it. Arthur Cristóvão, the Vice Dean of UTAD, of the University in Vila Real. First of all, he asks, from your experience, what are the obstacles to develop and implement the vision you are sharing in Portugal, in concrete? Is it easy or is it difficult? And the second question is being very small an obstacle or an advantage? For instance, Vila Real is a town of about 40,000 people with a university with about 7,000 students. So I think that in this context, is it?
Okay. Okay, well, I'll try and tackle the two questions with an overlapping answer. In terms of the obstacles, from my experience working in Portugal over the last 15 years, there's a real openness to new ideas and to testing some of these ideas around creative city making. But then there tends to be an aversion to mainstreaming some of this. So something is seen as a project on the margins, an idea to be explored. Maybe it can come out as a festival or an event or a symposia conference, a symposia series or something. But cities have struggled to take that strategic decision to really explore the creative assets that they have and embrace the holistic opportunity that creativity brings to planning, to governance, and to city making overall. So there's been lots of small acts, but very few big strategic acts so far. But it's shifting. Although the last 6 months, people have been living in a rescue mindset. What can we keep? What can we save? I think now we are seeing a shift towards reframe. And this crisis, much more so than the financial crisis of 2008, has to be that pivot point. There can't be going back. We can't go back to those old models. It's almost a suicide note to use some of our old strategies for the future. So I'm hopeful that some cities will embrace their creative potential and recognize that this is an opportunity rather than a desperate time to look at the assets that you have in a city and utilize creative thinking to generate a new narrative for the future. And this is where we get into the realm of the smaller city. I think it's harder in many ways for the bigger cities to pivot like that. There's so much that is out of sight for a larger city in terms of, and out of control, frankly, for a larger city. Whereas a smaller city offers the luxury of intimacy and a scale where resources can be managed and where there can be greater accountability between not just the politicians or the municipality and the citizens, but greater accountability across the city in terms of people being able to show different types of leadership. And when it comes to the resources in a smaller city, if you have a university, then that is an incredible resource. It's much harder to talk about talent development and the application of knowledge and creativity without a university in the city or working in the city. So some people often see that as a challenge because universities in smaller cities can be disproportionately big. You get this dualism between the city and the institution. You often get this kind of frustration that more isn't being made of the university. And sometimes the university will say, we'll recognize they're not making more of the assets and resources of the city. But again, we need to use this crisis to reframe that. There will be in university in Vila Real, there will be some incredibly high value specialism in certain areas. How can we make sure that specialism leaks into other strategic areas of city making? Because the challenge of scale is that if you're a specialist in a small space, in a small city, then all of your connections have to be outside of the city. That's where you get scale and leverage. But if you can connect, for example, environmental sciences with material science, with arts, with urbanism, etc., then you've got an economy of scale, even in a smaller city. to make a difference, to do something new. And I do, though, urge universities to really attend to what is enshrined in most of their missions, which is around the third strategy, to see the city as a resource and to explore the city as a platform for experimentation and development, but built on mutuality. Not just saying this is what we teach, this is what we specialize in a university, then we're going to test it in this city. There needs to be that engagement with the city. What are its challenges? What are the social, economic, and environmental and cultural challenges? What are also its assets? What knowledge is there in the city that can reframe the university as well? So finding that third space for that conversation, I think, is an urgency, but also a great opportunity for Villarreal and other smaller cities that have universities.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I think you already answered this next question, but anyway, I'll put it. It's Emilio Gouveia who asks how to go about from university with an S to university with a C, and he added that this is a non-trivial problem.
Yeah.
How to make that bridge between university and university?
Yeah. Well, the answer will vary and by city and university, and one of the challenges often is spatial, because lots of universities are campus universities, so they physically are disconnected from the city, and that obviously creates a symbolic barrier as well to partnership and collaboration. I don't know what the situation is in Villarreal. But if there's a spatial element, then you need to find ways to bring the university into the city and vice versa. Finding those hubs, those platforms and those programs that connect and unlock and make a university more porous and make the city more amenable. And then there's a programmatic question internally within the university. So to what extent is there a civic dimension in research and teaching? To what extent are staff rewarded for having a civic dimension in their work? To what extent is the university exposing its institutional brand and business model to the place, identity and brand and business model of the city? And I see this a lot where universities turn their back on the city because they see there being an existential risk to their brand and attraction power, their business model, if they get into bed with the city too much. Whereas in other cities, I see an absolute shared value proposition where they recognize their fortunes are utterly intertwined. So if we look at the latter, I think the university and the city needs to take some shared risks, and then you take shared rewards. If you don't do things, if you don't take risks together, then you're always going to be slightly disconnected and separated and not braving this together and not building trusted relationships. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Another question that touches me very personally. Carlos Pinto asks, some contemporary theorists think that the performing arts have not been benefited from increased investment in the creative industries. In other words, the investment of many municipalities was often directed to areas more related to design, architecture, but this investment has no concrete impact on the dynamics developed by artistic theater or music collectives, or even theaters. Taking as a reference the Throsby's concentric circular model from your experience, is this scenario confirmed?
Yes, it is. I'm just going to pull out a quote actually here, because this is really relevant to some work we're just doing in Exeter, which I mentioned to you earlier on. We're just doing some follow-up work in Exeter, which is looking at the role of the performing arts sector in a post-COVID city, and looking at how performing arts and practice can be a really integral part of the ecosystem as the city reboots. And there's a quote that I was sent by the theatre critic Lynn Gardner, and her quote is, "While the mainstream spends sleepless nights worrying about how it can reopen theatres both safely and in a way that is financially viable, small independent companies have been exploring different possibilities, trying to remake and secure their own and theatre's future. In the process, they've been providing opportunities for freelancers to make it and be paid. It's crucial because they cannot wait for months before theatres fully reopen. The reason I use that quote is that what we're seeing is a much more inclusive description of theatre and the performing arts. And in Exeter, and I'm seeing this in other cities, we're seeing people are much less restrictive in the definition of theatre and the performing arts. People are talking much more around creative practice and making. And in sometimes often that has a performative element, which might historically not have been called theatre or the performing arts. So that there is an opportunity for a city post-COVID to re-articulate the value of theatre and the performing arts in a way that is inclusive of the process of creative practice and of independent and micro performance and participatory work. And the theatres, building-based theatres, need to embrace that as well, so they become much more hubs for the wider making and creative landscape, inclusive of theatre makers, but also other art forms. So I agree with the point that theatre and performing arts, I think, has been lost in this strategic appropriation of culture and creativity for city making, but it can be found again if we explore what is now a very vivid ecosystem of creative practice, which is linked to theatre and performing arts, but transcends it and connects into visual arts, into literature, into filmmaking, into digital as well. And that is a way of getting beyond the concentric circular model, which is pretty rigid and goes much more to a reality of interdisciplinary work with theatre and performance at its heart. And that is the future, I think.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
And I think we've reached more or less the end of our time, but not of our discussion. So we will hopefully continue it, and we have lots of food for thought for now. I would like to invite everybody to show up, as we usually do, before the end of our talk. Pedia a todos, convidava a todos a ligar as vossas câmaras para que nos possamos despedir olhando uns para os outros, como tem sido o hábito das nossas conversas. Bom, queria agradecer imenso, claro, ao Tom. Acho que foi uma apresentação muito densa, que daria aso a muitas subconversas, and I hope that we will manage to do that in the near future. And besides that, queria convidar todos para continuarem a acompanhar o nosso ciclo, que continua no mês que vem com o geógrafo João Seixas. E bom, não sei se alguém quiser fazer alguma intervenção final, José Luís, António Ramalho, Isabel, bom dia, desde há bocadinho. Muito obrigada a todos pela presença, pela participação. E mais ninguém quer dizer nada?
Muito obrigado. Thank you very much, Tom. I would share this comment from our audience, from Isabel Alves. Thank you, Tom, for fostering our imagination regarding small cities. A great talk. So that's the reaction we get from our audience. Thank you very much. And yes, next month we'll be back.
Obrigada.
Muito obrigada.
Obrigada. Eu não consigo ligar a câmara no meu computador.
Eugénia Almeida, vice-presidente da Câmara Municipal, vereador da Cultura. Ficamos muito felizes que tenha podido assistir a esta conversa.
Não consigo.
Tom Fleming, embora nós não podemos vê-la assim, mas...
mas eu estive aqui convosco.
Muito obrigada.
Obrigada.